Hello and welcome to Meeting People with me, Amal Pandey. Meeting People is a podcast where I have long conversations with adventurous, rebellious, and sometimes courteous free spirits. And today I am very excited to have a new friend called Matt Cooper. And Matt, let's just get straight into it rather than me try and preamble an intro because people want to hear from you and not me really here.
For sure.
I've got you down as a filmmaker,
Yep.
a youth worker, a writer,
Yep.
a creative genius, maybe?
A creative genius.
No? Okay, let's roll it back. Let's let people decide. But creative artist, perhaps?
I'll take creative
Take
genius.
it. All right. Well, look, creative
I'll
genius. Let's do
inhabit
that. Now, I'd love to do a bit of background, actually, because although we are friends, I don't actually know that much about you.
Yeah.
And how did you end up getting into filmmaking? Let's start there and then take it from there.
Yeah. So I guess my real background is actually started in music.
Okay.
I was involved a lot in producing short films with my cousin, who was a bit of a more than an enthusiast about filmmaking.
Right.
He was super obsessed with the idea of filmmaking when we were like kind of 14, 15 years old. And when he set about producing his own films, I was then pulled in alongside that because I was like, oh, I want to help. Let me do the music. I was like his best friend. Like, let's just be part of something interesting going on. And then kind of fast forward, the music thing was always there. And particularly I had a love for writing music for film. I wasn't necessarily amazing at it, but I definitely enjoyed it. Until such a day where I actually moved to Romania for about 4 months to work for a charity in a hospice when I was 18 years old.
And what year was this?
This must have been around 2012, maybe.
Got it.
2012, 2013. So good 10 years ago. And I went there as part of a charity that was connected with my church. And I went there, worked in a hospice. Through that time, I exercised really my skills of pastoral care and community engagement more so than music or any other kind of technical aspect of my life. So when I returned and I was trying to figure out what I should do next with my life, I was kind of an 18-year-old, had no real forward plan about what was going to happen after that. I had a few suspicions about whether I might go do music. But my granddad actually came up to me, and he's a bit of a wise old wizard type grandfather. He looked me in the eye and he said, Matt, I think that you should go study youth work because you have such a passion and such a skill with working with people. And I thought that was lovely. And being someone without direction, when someone that you respect comes up to you and says, I think you should do this, I was like, oh, let's give it a go. So I ended up going to a university called Ridley Hall, which is a training place for Church of England vicars and priests.
Right.
But they were running a youth work kind of degree as well, youth work and practical theology. And I think community work was kind of somewhere in the title as well. I went and studied there in Cambridge at the same time as having a job in East London in a church working with young people. And for 3 years, I really gave my life to the pursuit of becoming a good community worker, becoming a good youth worker, and working with people to really, I guess kind of do what I could.
So describe to me what youth work kind of entails.
Well, in essence, youth work is about creating safe spaces for young people to flourish. And other than that, there's there's a multitude of agendas which goes alongside the professional practice of youth work around education and growth in terms of, is this person growing into someone that can contribute to society? But also, is this young person growing in such a way where they kind of feel fulfilled, where they're safe? That was always a really big one, especially in East London as we were rising in the knife crime. And
safe spaces is quite a loaded term, isn't it, these days?
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm guessing, you wouldn't use that term unless most of the people you're working with were in unsafe spaces for most of the time that they were probably not at school.
Yeah.
So does that term, the use of that term, safe space, kind of frustrate you sometimes when it's applied wrongly?
I think it's said in optimism
Right.
more than anything else. I think there's an absolute necessity in our country, particularly given the lack of resource that's been put into it by the government in terms of creating safe spaces for young people. Obviously, I came into youth work at a time where the Labour government was very much like their work, some of what I thought was their good work, that was like ending their youth spaces, the careers services. They were all kind of dying out. So these third-party organisations had to step up and provide what they could. In my experience, it was mainly the church that were doing that, or other faith-based organisations who were stepping into the kind of fold and saying, well, someone's got to create a safe space because literally our streets are full of young people being stabbed. They're full of underage pregnancy, rape, all manner of, intense, horrific things that young people are living through.
But it's suboptimal ways to kind of grow up and become a useful part of the world.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying useful as in the kind of, I don't want to, I never wanted to filter young people into being this narrow kind of good citizen. For many a times if it came about conforming to rules, like I kind of almost actively didn't want to help young people conform to rules because if you push that too far, that's not necessarily helpful either. I don't want to pacify young people from being courageous and loud and bolshy and making big statements. Like, never want to crush that. But certainly there's something about, if you're a criminal or you're overtly violent, then you can't contribute to society and you can't be part of the bigger picture of making, whole communities better for everyone. So in terms of creating a safe space, it was very much about, if we create somewhere safe as youth workers where you can come explore who you are away from danger or prejudice, or even school where the pressure is so high of kind of achieving academic success.
Well, look, I just want to rewind a bit then, because, what was school life like for you, and how did you end up? Did you have any idea? You said you got some pointers from your granddad who kind of gave you a bit of direction, and you said you were maybe lacking in direction before then, but was school therefore a source of frustration because it didn't give you the direction you wanted? Or what frustrated you about it?
I mean, I think I was always quite independent.
Okay.
I wasn't necessarily that great at making friends. I probably sat closer to the kid that walked around the playground on his own than anything else. I don't think I would...
Which, looking at you now and talking to you now, is quite, as ever, these, not everyone's the popular kid at school, but, it does surprise you sometimes that people just take time to
flourish. I mean, to be honest with you, I think late puberty did good things for me. Really, I didn't grow in confidence, even physicality. It wasn't until I was closer to 20 where I kind of really leveled out in more kind of key attributes and characteristics for kind of being happy. Not happy, but I really felt like, for me, my body and my mind caught up with something that would be helpful to me in achieving what I wanted to achieve much later. There's
a term coined by an author called Anthony Trollope, who wrote a series of fictional novels in the 19th century called hobbledehoy. I think I've told you about this before, but he described one of his characters as a hobbledehoy, and it was very much, he was writing about himself as well when he was growing up. And hobbledehoys are kind of boys who sort of into their 20s, like they're gangly, they've got bad posture, they mumble, and they don't have the kind of, they're not like the boy that's been well coached by parents to kind of stand up straight with the violin and run the 100 meters with
absolutely not.
And all of a sudden this character kind of emerges from his hobbledehoyness.
Absolutely. And I have a lot to thank for my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. She kind of, I think she saw a diamond in the rough in a sense. shaped me a little bit. But school definitely was not a place of thriving for me, you know.
Why not? Apart from your...
From an academic perspective, very dyslexic.
Okay.
It could be argued that I have, whether or not I have ADHD, I certainly have ADHD tendencies that make it very hard to sit still and concentrate for any prolonged period of time.
Guilty, yeah.
Well, no, I'm happy sitting still for things that I deem useful and completely uninterested in sitting down for things that are boring and don't have some kind of relevance to where I'm engaging. So if someone's going to teach me Spanish and I'm like, but I'm not interested in learning Spanish, like there's far more priorities in my life than Spanish. Yeah. You know, I was like that when I was younger, but then at the same time, very much a loner. So socially, there was no kind of place to retreat to. So even when I didn't want to engage with school, I couldn't exactly retreat into a friendship group that didn't want to engage in school either. It was very much kind of, I'm me on my own doing my own thing. And I think that drove me probably when I was younger to, you know, self teach myself lots of instruments, be very creative at home, make films with my cousin, who was probably my best friend and close friend through them years. So for me, school was a massive kind of meh experience of not really loads of friends, no real success
and no fulfillment.
I can't say that I was like savagely bullied or anything like that.
But look, I everything that you're saying is kind of, you know, chimes, resonates, you know, and it's something that I've had to grapple with for a while, where I really struggled to kind of get my head down and focus on things. And it was only until a few years ago I was reading a book by an author called Nassim Taleb, and he talks about, it was a book called Anti-Fragile, which I highly recommend everyone reads if they get a chance. But he talks about procrastination, and in it, you know, and procrastination, if there's a, you know, gold medal, you know, I'm going to be a consistent competitor for that top spot, and I'm sure, you know, many people listening and watching, and yourself included, there. But he said that procrastination is actually not a bug, it's a feature of life, because it's your body, it's your soul telling you, you know, this isn't for you. And you, when the work feels not effortless, but, you know, it feels, you know, important, and it feels effectively, you know, it's, you do it because you want to do it, and it drives you to do it, and then you screw it up, and then you want to do it better.
I mean, because certainly, like, I was never void of having the ability to pay attention or work hard.
Yeah,
you know, that's always made sense to me. But like you said, it's been in environments of no one's telling me that this is how I should spend my time. No one's forcing me into or backing me into a corner where I have to give it to some arbitrary, which is how I do feel about a lot of our schooling system.
Well, this will be the third podcast where I start moaning about.
Exactly, So we're not going to go there, because I was at the other two. We don't need to. But I think if jumping into my youth work, there was a sense of, and this is actually why I exited youth work after the 3 years of studying it, was because I couldn't, what would be the right word, bring together this idea of building a safe space for young people, but also seeing them and witnessing them having to go through our academic system in this country. And I felt like, if anything, I was only going to be a bad influence for pushing against that too hard.
Right.
And being like, yeah, don't worry about paying attention in school, because school sucks.
Right.
But you've got, these kids have to live through it. Yeah. You know, they have to go to school relatively. That there's no good being a youth worker sitting outside of it again. Yeah, no, you're right, it sucks. I couldn't like bring them two things together, them two words together. I'd be like, I'm fully endorsing like the way that we're looking after and educating young people in this country. It doesn't make sense to me, and thereby I'm not actually an advocate for like helping them through something, or at least I'm an advocate for them being healthy and educated, just not the way that we're doing it. So it made there be an impossible tension, of being a good youth worker.
Yeah. So basically, you at the same time, I'm guessing in your spare time, you were doing a lot of creative stuff, your music, you were
Yeah,
making films, and then you decided to go to Romania. So what?
So Romania was actually before the university
Right.
thing. So Romania was the catalyst for working with young people.
Got it.
I think there does seem to be. I grew up in church, and I'm still very much Christian. Spend less time in church these days than I used to. COVID had a big effect on my relationship and my life with going to church every Sunday morning.
Right.
That's probably the longest lasting effect that COVID and lockdown really had on me. But
We can dive into that later. Maybe.
we can dive into that later. The kind of continuity for, what was the question? I've forgotten. I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So basically, you decided that youth work isn't for you.
Yes.
And you were at the same time in your spare time doing
Yes.
kind of your creativity stuff.
Thank you. So through church, through working and studying youth work, working in youth work, there was obviously this creative thing growing in me that mainly played itself out in music, even still at that point in time. I was playing a lot of music. I was doing a lot of music in church, in my job. But it got towards the end of my degree, and we got asked about it, got to dissertation time, and I wasn't a big fan of the writing still being dyslexic. That hadn't gone anywhere, and I was kind of I was growing in my enjoyment of writing, but certainly wasn't like kind of thriving in that art form. And when it got to the dissertation time, I was like, oh, screw it. I'm just going to make a film. And I didn't own a camera. I didn't know how to make a film. I'd never, apart from helping my cousin make films where I was doing the music, I had never held a camera in my life. Yeah. So I took the opportunity when it got there to say to the people leading my course, could I make a film instead of doing the writing? And they were like, you can't avoid doing the writing, but you can do less writing if that helps. And I was like, less writing is good for me. Yeah. So I borrowed a camera from my cousin who I'd been making these films with when I was a child, and proceeded to make a documentary instead of doing a dissertation, basically. And that was my first real leap into the filming world, like right away at the end of my youth work degree, where I put together this documentary which was all about contextual theology, right? Which to this day is probably one of the forming kind of pillars underneath all of my work. It's this idea that the way theology is the way of us thinking about God, essentially, and the contextual theology is about the influences and the sources from which we draw our understanding of what God is like. And so for Christians, for example, the contexts of the theology would be really heavily invested in the Bible, the holy book of Christians, all the way through to I see God in just the person walking down the street or the tree over there. And there's like a spectrum of all of them contexts. Don't want to go into it hugely here because I don't remember loads of it. But I made this documentary that I then presented back to the organization I was working with and said, this didn't go down particularly well. I was like, here's a really honest reflection of what you say that you're doing, but I've done all these interviews with people in your organization and your church, and they don't quite line up. I don't remember exactly why they don't line up, but it was this moment of stepping into, I could communicate really effectively through making films. And that kind of brought together the two kind of fundamental pieces of my work for the last 5 years, really.
So you finally found your voice effectively in a way that you couldn't through the written word.
Absolutely.
And then you decided to kind of build your career around that. Is that right?
Yeah. And the written word has come back round now as
that's the thing.
Writing a book. So it's funny how it works. But what happened after that is I needed a job. So I finished my degree, made this film real high. I have 6 weeks, basically summer off in preparation for getting married to my fiance. And I'm basically being a bum during that kind of 6 weeks, just like living the free life after finishing a job and uni and going, what the flip happens next? And the only thing I'm actually like, this film that I made was nowhere near good enough to actually get me a job as a filmmaker. Like it was probably shockingly awful.
Have you seen it back since?
I mean, I found a couple of the interviews, and
Right.
it's not pretty. It's not good. It's really not good. Yeah. But some people might think it's
like
right.
people like watching my early podcast. Yeah. But yeah, no, that's always the way. So okay, you.
So I have like, all I've got to my name is a youth work degree,
Right.
and I get offered a job from a colleague friend who says, I think you could probably come and do what we do. He ran a schools work charity where they basically was working with primary school kids and secondary school children, and going into schools and talking about the Christian faith and doing basically lessons on Christmas, Easter, the Holy Trinity, communion, all aspects of the Christian faith, and doing education. And that was particularly prevalent where I was living, because I was living and working in Redbridge, which is super high population of Hindu people and Muslim, like people with Islamic faith. So actually it was like a lot of the teachers working in my community just didn't have any idea about Christianity, and they were like, but we have to teach it, so could you help us? So that was
an outsourced solution.
Yeah, exactly. But I was doing that for about a year until I had a really big falling out with the new boss. Actually, it was the second boss that I'd had at that job, and we just had a cataclysmic fallout, which led me to having a full-on mental health breakdown.
What you don't have to go too deep if you don't want to, but what was the kind of general?
I thought that. See, I didn't say it. We had a disagreement in how the work should be done.
Okay.
Best. And I was at this point a 21-year-old, full of energy and ego. That was probably slightly bigger than a 21-year-old should have. I was probably a very big fish in a very, very tiny pond.
Okay.
And I wasn't aware that that was the case either. And
maybe the pond was a bit bigger than you thought it was. But yeah.
So we had a big falling out. And then that led me to kind of have this breakdown for a good month. We moved back in with my parents-in-law. Not back in. We moved in with my parents-in-law for a month. I didn't have a job because I'd resigned from this job that I had. And I was like, oh gosh, I've literally got nothing. I'm back to square one. My ego had been like taken out like a
reset.
Yeah, just absolutely destroyed. And I was really back at the beginning, to be honest with you. It was the most humbling moment of my life where I built this kind of career I built a character of being larger than life and really confident. And particularly because of all the youth work, you're this gathering point for lots of people, and you're not a hero, but you're very much the center point of a community. And that, all of this reinforces 20-year-olds' egos. And then to have a massive crash down. And that's when I was faced really with the moment which ultimately, means my life is like what it is now, where I was like, I'm definitely not cut out for working with young people and children. 2, I can't do this being employed thing because I'm suffocating and I need to rest. It sounds really almost selfish when I think about it, but at the same time sounds like just super normal for human beings. I need to rest when I need to rest because I don't work between the hours of 9 to 5, so I can't plan my rest. Like, my brain is either on or off. Like, I relatively don't have much control of that. And then I want to work when I want to work. And I'll work hard when I work, but I'm not. I was struggling with being subject to someone else's opinion of when that work should be happening. So that kind of sent me right down to the bottom, and it was like, okay, I'm left with nothing. And it was like here's the moment to get up and go again.
Well, it's not uncommon for the types of people that I want to talk to who will feel that way in employment or at school. It's a kind of running theme. And part of the reason I think that is that the, school and employment are based on the factory, and the factory is the kind of based on the average of how to get the best average output per worker at scale. And that therefore, by definition, the average ignores the tails or the extremes. And too many people force themselves into that average because they feel like they have to, and they live deeply unhappy lives. And some of them get out through virtue of luck or privilege because they don't have to work. And others, I guess, come out through episodes of forced humility, which is kind of sounds like what you went through. But ultimately, it's like the concept of kind of post-traumatic growth, which is good for, it's not nice at the time, but you've definitely seemed like you've grown. So like fast forwarding to today, look, you've got what seems from the outside to be a kind of fairly flourishing creative business. You're writing a book, so that you didn't know this at the time, but how did you start the process of kind of acquiring independence?
So I guess that the first thing was I had two real needs at the time. One was I still have to make some money.
Yeah.
Because, eating
is quite important.
Living in general, having a roof over my head, and being a married man as well. I didn't want to just kind of let my wife just bear all of the responsibility. She did that for a time when I was really unwell, but then it got to a point again where I was like, I can't just turn into a freelancing bum who just waits for the next creative opportunity. I still want to help our family have a foundation
with consistency,
stable, with a level of consistency. So I found a part-time job, which was in training people to tell stories to young children. And that kind of worked for me because I got to work from home relatively. It wasn't like a clock in, clock out kind of setup. And I just had to teach people how to do what I used to do.
Yeah.
And that was nice because it meant that I got to work with adults primarily. And that was very much just this is a part-time job to make some money. On the side of that, I was taking every creative opportunity that I could find with or without pay.
Right.
It was jump into everything. It was have a camera in your hand and go. Film everything. Every time you meet someone, say, I can make a film for you. I can make a film for you. I can make a film for you. And slowly, I went from earning £0 for making a little video for that person to someone else paying me £250 to film their spoken word, to jumping into making a really awful website for a small charity, and just slowly
building
taking
skills.
on different skills. At the time, I probably was very invested in the idea of becoming a filmmaker of sorts. When I say filmmaker, I don't mean like blockbuster or narrative filmmaker. I was always much more interested in telling real stories.
Yeah. Not
that narrative filmmaking like blockbusters don't do that, but interviewing real people and much more documentary led filmmaking. Yeah. And that led itself quite nicely into the charity sector, which I had obviously experience in working with church, and kind of kept with these roots of community work, which were still familiar to me, and I didn't completely want to throw them out. I still was deeply interested in social justice and helping people, move their way through life and grow. So it was a natural kind of pairing together of I could make films for charities.
Do you have any heroes in the kind of film world that you look up to, or documentary makers or practitioners that you kind of inspired you, or is it all just bottom up?
Not specifically so. I think there's a lot of YouTubers out there that a lot of filmmakers have so much to so much to be thankful for, like Peter McKinnon and Matt Diavella and people like that who have done astronomical amounts for the filmmaking community, and have probably been instrumental in, they're a bit like Moses leading the slaves out of Egypt. Like, these people on YouTube have given people the resources to leave their full-time jobs and go get a camera and go start making films and hustling.
Yeah.
They've been instrumental in that. So I guess at a time they probably were my heroes, and very much given me the tools to do that, but not in the niche down that I was really concerned with, which was this charity world of work.
And you mentioned a word that means a lot to me, hustling. Would you define that as basically taking on things that you maybe, objectively had no proof that you could do them?
Yeah.
And then just doing them?
Absolutely. Yeah. That was my get up for like 3 years, was just straight up, I have no idea what I'm doing. No one else knew that.
Yeah.
But that was definitely my way into everything. My mouth did the majority of the work for me.
Yeah.
And then I was always okay, and I still am okay with learning under pressure. Like, that has always got me out of bed in the morning. Like, a good example was when it got to COVID and lockdown. I was like, well, I'm a filmmaker. Like, I have to go and make films of stuff.
Here we go. Yeah.
There's nowhere to go. I can't go film anything. So I was like properly screwed. And I wasn't self-employed because I had a limited company at that point. So it wasn't small enough, if you like, to be entitled to any of the government support
furlough
for that,
or anything like that. Yeah.
But then my business wasn't big enough to get any support for that either. So I sat right in this weird middle ground where I could make no money as a filmmaker. And that's when I decided, I was like, well, I guess I'll just learn how to animate then. So, I started walking around to people I knew being like, do you want an animation? I was like, I don't know how to animate anything. Nothing. Literally nothing.
And what, the internet? You just go on the internet and it teaches you? Yeah.
YouTube again. Just YouTube has taught me, my career is built off of YouTube videos.
Yeah.
100%. So hustling for me is very much that. It's I need to do something. And if anything, and this is when I've asked my dad what, I was encouraged by someone on my podcast to ask your parents what your values were. And I asked my dad what I was interested in when I was growing up and what my values were. And he's always been of the opinion that I'm more interested in learning new things than I am in just anything else. Yeah. So there was like inherently the hardcore learning process of some of these things was just driving me. So it was the excitement.
Does that follow a period of sort of feeling, slightly uncomfortable with being comfortable because you've hit a kind of plateau, and the learning curve has flattened, and you're not afraid, and you miss the feeling of being afraid and uncertain, and so you kind of throw yourself back into, okay, it's going to be animation now.
For sure. And that's been the kind of every year there's been this sense of, I feel too comfortable now. How do I make myself uncomfortable?
Yeah.
And that was where like this skill set and that happened a few times, filmmaking, photography, animation, web design. That's kind of been like the story of the last
talk about
4 years.
Talking about kind of throwing yourself into discomfort. Ukraine.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So I still had maintained quite a lot of contact with, I had dropped contact with Romania from my time of when I lived there, when I was 18. And it just so happened by chance that two of my really close friends were starting a charity to work in Romania. Did I say Romaine?
No, you said Romania.
I said Romania.
Yeah.
They had started a charity in Romania and they invited me out there to initially go make one film. And this was in 2021. And I went out there, made a film with them there. And then it just so happened that it was March 22, wasn't it, that Ukraine really kicked off, or February 22, that I'd been invited to go back and make more film work in Romania.
Right.
in March 22. And it was literally as we were, you know, going that week or something that we hear the news of a war breaking out in Ukraine. And we're faced with a bit of a predicament because we've got tickets to the neighboring country. Right, the place where we were going was quite near the border of Ukraine. And we're hearing this news of all of these people mass leaving Ukraine, and where the project that we were going to spend time with, their main concern has just overnight gone from here's all the day-to-day projects of working with Roma gypsy communities and the already huge levels of poverty and need that are there, into, oh dear, there's a whole country leaving and they're coming into Romania, Poland and anywhere else they can get. And, you know, you're faced with a moment where they're like, are we still going? Are we still going to one of the new, most like refugee, like intense crises on the planet at the current moment? So we get on a plane after a few conversations, and I felt like a right numpty having like a camera in my bag, being like, really? Is there anything? Is this? I felt almost insulting in a way to be like, everyone's running away. Or not everyone's, obviously there's people staying to fight a brutal war, and that must have taken so much courage for the people that stayed in Ukraine and fought. But I felt like such a bit of an idiot, to be honest, because I'm like, there's people trying to escape. I don't want to kind of be a spectator who's going over there to go see what's happening because, you know,
you felt sheepish because there was a sort of sense of prurience or a sense of like...
I didn't want to take advantage of people's extreme situation because it might be interesting on camera. And I think that's something that anyone that works in any kind of journalistic activity always has to reconcile, is that these are real people's lives. And if everyone's running away, do you really want to be the guy with a camera who's running in? Like there's a lot of questions to be asked. And I remember that being a really profound struggle internally for me, right up until the moment that when we were in Romania, it was coming to the day where we were going to go to the border and basically start making a film. And to date, it's not really one of the most interesting films that I've made in some ways, because I was just in shell shock the whole time. Like I've lost all ability to be able to do my job.
Were you kind of numbed by the kind of the wave of human kind of misery that was coming your way?
So we're kind of driving to the border in a minibus. I'm with one of my friends from here in England who started one of the charities that I work with called Big Love. And I'm with 4 or 5 guys that live in Romania. And we're all driving to the border kind of having no idea what's going to go on. But they're going with their minibus. We've got a whole bootload full of stuff like aid, blankets, food, toys, whatever they can find, coats. We're all driving. And our Romanians, particularly Roma, gypsy Romanians, don't really have a fond relationship with Ukraine in general. There's a bit of tension there anyway. They don't have a great relationship with the Romanian police and authorities. So going to the border, which is full of Ukrainians and government authorities, is not really where Roma gypsies who I was with, it's not a natural place for them wanting to be. But they're so concerned at this point with this is so devastating and they just want to do something. So that in itself was kind of magic.
Yeah. The kind of human barriers sort of came down.
Just completely fell down. Yeah. And we're just driving in relative quiet towards this border. And literally, do you know the term prophetic fallacy?
Yeah.
Where the weather echoes the emotion. It was like we were living in prophetic fallacy. It went from kind of a healthy 5 degrees where we were staying about an hour from the border. And I kid you not, it went from green fields to white fields. It went from 5 degrees to -10 in literally an hour's drive. Yeah. And you get to the border and it's the coldest place I've ever been, like straight up.
Yeah.
Before we talk about any crisis, it's freezing.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably cold. I can barely keep my hands out of my pockets to hold my camera in my hands. Then you look at this river, which is called the Danube River. and it's maybe 100 meters wide, and you hear the news from different people. There's queues of people that are thousands and thousands of people long, waiting to get on this tiny little ferry that crosses the Danube River, normally designed for going across, twice a day for one truck, is now, extraditing, helping people get out of Ukraine. And you're standing there going, what the flip is happening? And the most striking thing about the whole experience actually was that, unlike some of the other places where I've been and done humanitarian documentary work where people look poor, they look like life has really hit them hard, everyone coming out of Ukraine looked like me.
Yeah.
They're wearing their North Face coats. They're not, these aren't poor people.
This is war hitting.
This is people like me who live in a 4-bed house with, the same luxuries as I do, and they're running away. And that hits you hard because, if they had nothing and they were running away from nothing, then it's almost like the same kind of humanitarian story you hear.
You get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
And I definitely found that, amongst my friends and peers and people I work with, that this war in particular, because it was so close to home and it was, one kind of European nation on another European nation, just with the concept of crossing the border and invading, and there's all sorts of justifications and counter justifications we don't need to get into, but it really captured people here.
Yeah.
It's, everyone has, and it almost became political after a while, but the initial reaction was quite stark where, you got the WhatsApp profile photos being the Ukraine flag and people just kind of trying to show their solidarity.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily with the politics of it, but with just people who, as you described it, just one day they're going to work wearing their North Face jacket, and the next minute they're trying to get a boat across the border. And you saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight up.
And I think that was kind of fundamental for me in terms of as a filmmaker, of this wrestling with this juxtaposition of there's a really good photo opportunity there, but I shouldn't take it. And that has definitely, when it comes to my documentary work, that's become if you in order to take a photo or a bit of film of someone, there's this sense of you've either got to leave them with the same amount of dignity that you found them in, or you've got to increase their dignity by taking the photo or filming them. If there's any chance that their dignity will be decreased because of the photo, then don't take it.
How do you take that call? Because there's the same situation with two different people will have completely different outcomes. And, one person may go, you need to spread this message. You need to take this back home. It's your duty. You're here as the messenger so that people know what's going on. And the other side of it, someone might be like, how dare you kind of visit the zoo in my time of, misery to then profit off it in inverted commas, or build your own profile for your own. So I guess it's down to kind of what you're.
I think there's it would be wrong to say there's a science to it.
Correct. Yeah, I can see that.
In reality, it's a human looking another human in the eye situation, and just gauging in that moment. Particularly on that day, there was these moments where it was only women and old people coming across and children. There's no men anywhere. So straight away, at being a man who's there, straight away you're feeling the absence of their husbands and their partners and their brothers. So straight away there's like a natural call upon you. I don't know how best to describe this, but straight away you become I felt very protective of everyone and wanted to, create space for them, create safety for them by virtue of the fact that their partners, their husbands, their brothers, their fathers weren't there to do that.
You had a genetic conditioning that kind of kicked in. Survival.
So straight away I'm at war with myself because of that in that particular situation where you're like, the people that stereotypically would do the protecting, they're not here, or they are protecting them by fighting a war. They just happen to be 100 miles away over there.
Yeah.
So straight away, there's like if they were here, would I still take the photo? If their husband was standing next to them, would I still take the photo? If their son was next to them, would I still take the photo?
I see. So you were questioning whether you were kind of
taking advantage
of
in
their lack
absence
of yeah, got it.
Right. I hope that doesn't come across as kind of overly stereotyping gender roles, but there was that was a real feeling that I was experiencing in that moment. The second thing is that, you know, it's like these people were broke. That's it.
Yeah.
You know. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist or a photo to tell people that they were broke.
You're upping sticks. You're leaving everything behind.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever watched Schindler's List or read the book. It's a phenomenal film about set in Germany about the Holocaust effectively, and there's a scene where this Jewish couple get their home taken away from them. They get, they're obviously a very wealthy couple. They kind of dress, and they've got these suitcases, and that's all they've got with them. And they get put into this sort of the Nazi state reallocates them into a kind of much more cramped, squalid little flat. And they walk in, and the wife's like, it could be worse. And then the husband kind of looks at her and kind of disgusts, going, how could it possibly be any worse? And he shouts at her, not in regret, but in a kind of out of frustration. And then right after he shouts that, about 40 families stream in behind them, because they're all going to be living in this little. They thought they had the flat to themselves, stepping down from their kind of whatever lifestyle that they were used to before the Nazi Party took over. And then all of a sudden, just as he felt he was at rock bottom, the kind of another
and then another bottom came,
and then many more bottoms were to follow from there. But I've completely lost my train of thought as to why I was saying that. But it's certainly, what was I talking about?
I think we were just talking about when in face of real
correct. So
pain.
So that's an example of, again, the reason why that scene was so powerful is because, you're sat watching it I watched it back when you won't know what these things are. They're called DVDs, and in the comfort of your own, living room, and it felt much more real because it could have been your living room that you were turfed out of whilst watching this film. And versus the kind of the desensitization that you get from films and documentaries about poverty, where it's kind of the norm.
Exactly.
And your thing about the North Face jacket, the kind of people who've just been turfed out with nothing but their own belongings.
And I think that's
and it's forced poverty.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's when it comes down to it, poverty is poverty. It's like and it's hard to say, their pain is kind of more pain or less pain than someone else, but certainly in that moment, them things resonate with you really deeply.
It's that kind of hedonic treadmill. I don't know if you've heard of that term, but
I haven't. But I think I know what you're getting at.
It's sort of like, some people say, happiness is expectations minus reality, and when your reality overtakes, when your expectations are here, and all of a sudden it's the delta, the change that kind of drives happiness. And again, it sounds like we're belittling, or I'm belittling the kind of the people who are permanently in deep poverty because they don't know any better.
But you're right in a sense. And, it's that, like what you're just saying, in the Ukraine situation, there was like this huge drop from, it was like normal and then cliff edge. Whereas in other places, that curve of poverty has been in decline for a long time, or flatlined for a long time, whereas Ukraine is instantaneous. Like, you had this and now you don't.
Yeah.
It's a light switch on off, and that was tragic. But I think
So did you overcome? Sorry to interrupt you, but did you overcome though the kind of personal challenges you have of actually you're out here now? You've got to
I mean,
put your craft to work and start filming.
I think that in the moment I was like, film it now, make a decision later.
Right.
There's in all of the work that I've done in humanitarian kind of documentary filmmaking or photography, I do have a bit of a take the photo now, make a educated choice away from the moment where you're not thinking, when you're not surrounded by everything, and give yourself some breathing room to make a choice. So in the Ukraine, particular in that moment, I did what I could. I couldn't do very much because genuinely I could barely hold my camera. It was too cold. Like, my hands were in pain every time I took them out of my pocket for longer than a minute. It was the coldest I've ever been. So we made this film, and even though it only did a little bit of good, it did like spearhead a fundraising campaign that raised, X tens of thousands.
Brilliant.
Which is great. I mean, relatively to people fighting and losing their life, it's tiny. But
no, everyone's got to do their bit, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think actually now, when we first met, you had just come back from Ukraine, or you were I think you'd just come back, and we'd first got started chatting. And I kind of remember, so basically for context for people listening, we're filming this from...
it was Albania. I had just come back from Albania when we first met.
Got it, okay.
That was a different...
That's a whole different war, yeah.
That's a whole different war, yeah.
Crikey. But I think, we sort of... We're filming this in a co-working space out in autumnal Chelmsford.
Absolutely.
Called Patch. And I work for myself as well, and, tapping away on my laptop, and this guy comes and sits, it's in this shared space, and I kind of look at this guy and I'm like, God, look, I wish I was that cool. Look at this guy, look at his haircut, and he's got this big shirt and his hat and this kind of, why am I so like, with my chinos and kind of polo shirt, whatever it is.
That's what I thought. I was like, look at this loser. His chinos.
But the reality, you had basically come out of. It feels like you're coming out of this kind of, or you're re-entering a new phase as we kind of got chatting, and over the subsequent months, you're re-entering a new phase of discomfort and skill level, and the dyslexic kid or student who was negotiating with his university teachers to reduce his word count in any way possible has now flipped 180 to someone who's actively choosing to write.
Yeah.
And would love to know what drove you to do that, what the subject matter is, and kind of riff off that if you could.
So, I mean, in part, I don't really know what or how or when I changed to being someone that enjoyed writing.
Right.
But somewhere along the line, I just enjoyed writing. And that was not really a chosen thing. I don't remember doing anything about it, but...
Can I try and answer it for you? Can I give it a go? I think you were writing on your own terms, in your own time, at your own cadence, on your own subject matter, and it didn't matter. You weren't trying to pass an exam, or get through a course, and that's the term selfish writing is one that you're writing for yourself and no one else. You're not trying to build an audience or anything. But does that kind of, that's whenever I get through a successful period of writing is when I'm literally just doing it for me.
Yeah, I think that there probably is a truth to that. But perhaps...
And when did it start?
So basically, the start of the writing journey goes back maybe 4 years ago
Okay.
to the nucleus of the idea, which is connected to mental health. The book that I'm writing is about imagination, creativity, and mental health. I don't have a title yet. I'm still working on that.
Yeah.
But I remember I was away on a Christian retreat, and a young man, well, he was probably my age, we were both young men, asked if I could pray for him. He had been struggling with his mental health, and he was uttering the prayer to God, God, please take away my anxiety, which is a perfectly reasonable request, because being someone that struggles with anxiety on a deeper and profound level, sometimes anxiety sucks in all kinds of ways. So calling out to God is a perfectly reasonable response to that kind of pain. And I remember sitting next to him, not really knowing what to pray or what to think. And I was suddenly struck by this idea that if God were to remove the engine for anxiety, he would also have to remove the engine for beauty. And that was really the thought that I had. I was like, I suddenly felt, it was a really weird moment. I felt wrong praying for the removal of anxiety, because in one way I felt as though if someone's anxiety were to be removed, it would also hinder their ability to create things of beauty. And then I started a process of reconciling that for myself as someone that has anxiety and would love nothing more than to never have a day of feeling anxious about, a little mole on my arm being cancer, or, kissing.
Anything. Look, anything. Yeah.
All of the little triggering moments of anxiety, I'd give anything for that to go away. But I had to go on this journey of going, well, where does anxiety come from? Why do I have anxiety? And why, when I'm producing, and this was a genuine thing, and it might not be the case for anyone else, but why, when I concentrate and give purpose to my imagination, does the anxiety seem to be a little less potent? And went on this discovery process of, how do you manage your imagination? How do you become a friend of your imagination so that you can walk alongside it in the pursuit of beauty and still give it room to be reasonably anxious, because it has to be in order to protect you so that you don't do anything stupid. There's a level of anxiety that is absolutely necessary.
Evolutionarily.
And designed to protect us. It's that thing that says, don't jump off of that, or don't touch that, or, don't go sleep with that other woman. Your imagination has to spark up in order for you to think about the consequences of your actions. So that level of anxiety is obviously helpful. But I certainly found that there was this, if I was intentionally paying attention to creating things of beauty, and by beauty I don't just mean the narrow sense of beauty in terms of a beautiful painting. I mean beauty in the sense of paying someone a compliment, the beauty of making a cup of tea well in the morning, the beauty of putting the right amount of salt on your dinner, the beauty of editing a film, the beauty of a good conversation. By beauty I mean the fullness of life kind of you can bring into it. So as I was going along this journey over the last four years-ish, and this kind of thought process is just really unraveling very slowly over periods of time, and I'm listening to other people talk about other kind of really key concepts about order and chaos, and how much that kind of sinks into our bodies, and how the imagination is kind of this chaos machine, and it just produces disparate parts, and then there's also other parts of us responsible for bringing order to the randomness. Almost like your imagination is like Lego blocks all over the floor. Sometimes you can step on a Lego block and it can kill you. It can like be the most painful thing. And sometimes you can, build it into something that adds value. And I'm bringing all of these pieces together, gathering them together in my head on my own. And then you get to a point where you're like, oh, I think maybe, just maybe a tiny little bit, maybe someone else could learn something from some of the thought process that I've gone on. And initially I was like, well, I'm a filmmaker, so I should make a film or a documentary at least. But really I began to hit, so I started making a documentary about the subject. And what I began to hit was I really needed to find some new words, new sentences, new paragraphs in order to properly structure out the thoughts that I was having, because none of the conversations I was having were kind of scratching the itch of articulating this thing that I thought was prevalent to humanity. So that's when I sat down with, a couple of blank pieces of paper and just started to articulate what was in my head.
It's amazing because, the amount of people that I look up to who say, for example, there's a entrepreneur turned investor turned writer, philosopher, whatever you want to describe him as, a guy called Paul Graham, and he wrote an essay recently called Why I Write, and him alongside other people kind of recognize that it's a kind of it's an autodidactic tool. It's not necessarily marketing. It's about putting what's floating around your head onto paper. And when you try and do that process, you realize, oh, actually, this isn't as well thought out as I thought it was. Or the actual action of writing, it's not like you've got these thoughts and they just need to go, or this structured idea and it needs to go onto the page. The act of putting it on the page makes you realize where the holes are, makes you understand it better. Then you can put it back into your head and mix it around.
Exactly.
And you kind of figure that out without having to read Paul Graham or whoever, Neil Ferguson was the other guy who said this.
In a sense, maybe this was, I am in ultimate levels of gratitude to the people that ran my degree, because they were brilliant thinkers. Like I couldn't hold them from that. And even though I didn't fully appreciate it then, there was something about, like if you give writing real attention, you can articulate truths that are hidden from humanity, in a way that perhaps no other form of art or creativity can. Like if you can produce the right words in the right order, you can change the discourse of history. You only need to look at Martin Luther King, any of Jesus, whoever you want to pick through history. Like there's been words every now and then that have been uttered that change everything. I'm not for a moment professing that my book is going to have that level of effect. However, it could have that level of effect for one person. This is
a common trap everyone falls into, is that, whether it's someone wanting to start a company or, paint a picture and the kind of, those that have been trapped by kind of the kind of that center ground or that pull to average that we were talking about earlier will often use the kind of, well, you're not Steve Jobs, you're not Picasso.
Yeah.
And, actually speaking of, there's a great Picasso quote about creativity in artists. And, he said that every child is a phenomenal artist.
Yeah.
The challenge is I'm going to butcher the quote, but the challenge is keeping them that way as they grow up.
Yeah.
It's the point you felt sheepish when you said that, kind of bringing up, certain people in life who have used the written word or where the written word has enabled them to kind of scale their message. But the point is, it's almost like we've all got a responsibility to do it, no matter who you are.
And I think inherently, my belief about humans in general, and this is probably a big belief, is that in our uniqueness as individuals, everyone has, something to utter into life, something to speak into life.
Yeah.
Whether that be on global, national, household kind of influence, it doesn't really matter. But in our uniqueness, we all have words ideas, imaginings that can fundamentally change the reality of the people around us for the better.
Yeah, and the worse. And that's the point, I guess, you're trying to make, is that this sort of anxiety to beauty spectrum that we oscillate between often, is that you can't have one without the other, because otherwise you have nothing, and then you kind of lose your, what makes us different to let's say the rest of the animal kingdom, I should say, is that we have something, whether you want to call it a soul or you want to call it sentience, that it's really easy to hate humanity. And I get this a lot. I talk to people, particularly certain types of people they tend to be quite wealthy, or they tend to be quite kind of comfortable, and they kind of it's easy to kind of go, aren't people awful? Aren't you? Look at all these awful things that we do, and you're right, but that you can't have one without the other.
Yeah,
and the beauty of being sentient or having a soul is that you can create beauty rather than just live in it.
For sure.
And recognize it.
And it's that self-actualizing thing, isn't it? It's like something that exists in here. We have the ability to create. And obviously there's boundaries on that, and there's imaginings that are in no way realistic. Like, you can imagine about flying without a plane. If I wanted to pursue flying without a plane or any other aid, I would have a hard time. However, I think that it's... What I've found to be the case observing people is that their imaginations are kind of doing one of three things. And I think this is perhaps responsible for some of the profound mental health challenges that we're experiencing certainly in England, but I would imagine globally at the moment. But also for some of the amazing innovations that are kind of speeding up rampantly is because our imaginations are relating to us, our conscious thinking, if you like, in one of three ways. One way is the positive, is it's our friend. People have learned to walk alongside their imagination, to trust their imagination, to let their imagination speak to them, and people give it air room to go, I'm not just going to ignore this fantasy idea of electric cars. I'm going to pursue the creation of electric cars. I'm not just going to ignore the idea that there's a different way of having energy. I'm not just going to...
Or getting to Mars. We're trying not to talk about the same person here, but there are variations.
I'm not just going to ignore the fact that there's not a Baker's in Chelmsford. I'm going to put a Baker's in Chelmsford. That's someone who's walking alongside their imagination as a friend, and they let it have speaking room to them in the most positive of senses. And also in the sense that I think people that are honing like really healthy relationships are also in some ways real curators of their imagination, because the thought of I'm now going to actively mop the floor is an activity based upon your imagining of the results of mopping the floor,
or not having the floor
mopped. So there's a relationship there of friendship. Then you've got enemy, which I think is the prevalency of anxiety, certainly, is imaginations just keep serving up like a sushi bar, where all of the sushi goes around on one of their conveyor belts. It just keeps serving up like
disaster scenario after
horrific things, and they just keep coming by. And that's for a number of reasons. That can be down to trauma, that can be down to an imbalance of biological chemicals and processes in your brain. However, there's certainly something that to be true about the fact that once you're in that place of not having a friendly relationship with your imagination, it's very hard to move back into that place of friendship. So that negative relationship, which is for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'm exploring in my book, but I haven't written that chapter yet, that leaves us in one place. And then the other thing that we've got is it's just forgotten. And in that forgottenness, it's that the imagination is what I used to play with when I was a child. and now I'm void of imagination, and life is for staying in a straight line. And you could certainly say that of our predecessing generations, certainly post-war, where there's this sense of
stay in your lane,
get the good thing, stay in your lane, do it how it's meant to be done. Don't let your imagination, I mean, there's reasons for that, good reasons, but they're the kind of three things that I'm writing about.
And I think number two enemy that you just touched on, I'm going to try not, that's dangerous territory that I'm kind of very unqualified to opine on, but maybe in number one and number three, which is friend and forgotten, like, is that right?
Yeah.
Is anxiety a kind of, it's again, is it almost a feature? Is it telling you, you're on the, there's something more to you. Don't just stick with this path, because there's something more to you that you can there's a potential there that is unfulfilled, and the anxiety is just a very bad signal at telling you that you kind of.
I mean, I think that probably we have such a broad understanding, or narrow understanding maybe, of the term anxiety, that it has maybe become only negative. And I would almost, because of the way that we use the word anxiety now, I'd steer away from using that as like a tool for, is anxiety a tool for alerting you to positive change? Becomes a hard sentence to maybe discuss with someone who feels like they have deeply anxious. However, there is something of us where it is a warning, our imaginations are a warning system for going, there is more.
Yeah.
And that's just humans.
Well, let me flip it then, because, or just to kind of contextualize it, I worked in sales all my life, and I got very nice. It doesn't happen too often, but I got a compliment recently about you're such a natural salesman. You're very good at sales, and it's something I wish I could do. Is what the person said. Now, trust me, people listening and watching, there are plenty of people who will not pay me that compliment, who I've tried to sell things to. So, mate, I'm sure there's tons of room to improve. But my pushback to that person was that actually, anyone can do it. It can be taught, and it's like a muscle almost, and it's taught through experimentation and failure. And in the same way, is creativity actually similar to what Picasso was saying? Anyone can do it, but you just need to do it. You need to practice it. And there's so many people who get told, or feel that they get told, I'm not creative. I don't have the creative spark. I don't have the creative gene. And actually, you've got the imagination, and then your creativity is, you're bridging the anxiety bridge to get into doing creative acts.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, like, you watch my 2-year-old daughter, you watch her draw or paint. She just doesn't care. Anyone's watching, doesn't care if it's going to be liked and I've got, like, on the flip side, I've got a friend, and she's a phenomenally talented drawer, painter, and she doesn't do it.
Yeah.
She doesn't do it because she exacts such standards, or she gets worried about what people think. And actually, what people like Picasso did. I was just reading about Michelangelo the other, just very recently. He just turned up every day and did it. And 3/4 of the time he didn't finish stuff. Yeah. He just did it. And then what people see is the output and the best bits, but he had to do all the crap and all the unfinished stuff. Yeah. And so it's a very long-winded way of asking you, can anyone be creative and do creative things, whether it's filmmaking or writing? Yeah. It's just a muscle that they need to act on and commit to and turn up to? Or do you think it is something that just is innate and in some people, and for the rest it's, you're going to count beans and you're going to stay in your lane and
I mean, I think I think everyone is creative. I stand firmly by that. Or I think everyone has the ability to create, maybe a better way of saying it. And that's by virtue of creating atmospheres in rooms, You know, we all know someone that says they're not creative, and then they walk in a room and the whole room suddenly everyone's like, oh no, they're here. You know, they've created an atmosphere. So we're all creating. It is just a byproduct of who we are. Is everyone artistic? No, because artistic people have honed skill and tangible like activity over a prolonged period of time. But does everyone have the ability to create, or the ability to learn how to create better? For sure. I think that where we get trapped is, one, we use create in a very niche sense of the word, which applies to the arts. And I think that's not very helpful. Yeah. I think what we also do is, and maybe this is unique to our generation, but maybe it goes all the way back, is that because we exact such high standards on ourselves from everyone else, we've all just become so afraid of being judged for anything that is unique to us, that suddenly it feels like whenever you do any form of creativity, in the sense of something that's a novel idea or something that's unique in your sense, it's like raising your head above, you know, the trenches, and you might get shot by a sniper. Yeah. So and it doesn't matter what scale that is. It's like, imagine someone like writing a little poem and then putting it out on Instagram. You know, in one way,
people kind of go, who do you think you are?
But then you feel the intense burden of the whole world is looking at your poem. Or, you know, add in a bit of salt into a cake which doesn't have salt on the recipe. That can feel terrifying to some people, because what if the cake tastes bad? What if people don't like the cake because of my little bit of salt I added? Yeah. Every time we inject in originality or something that's unique to us, it's us putting ourselves out there, which makes the act of creativity just scary.
Do you think also that, like, I mean, I remember when I was having a conversation with a friend who found out, not directly, that I'd started a podcast, or I was about to start a podcast, and he said, he was very open. It was a phenomenal conversation. He said, look, it almost felt, I had something in my stomach churned of some, and it was almost like a mirror was held up and put into my face, where, you know, like, you're not doing, why aren't you doing this? Kind of, it was the people the people who criticize people who stick their head above the parapet is often it's because they are, I mean, he wasn't doing that, he was being very open, but like, you know, he's pointing to the examples of people who kind of criticize. It's because they're almost having a reflection of themselves shown at them by other people's bravery or create. I'm not saying I'm brave, but like for people to do things, because it's a reflection of their own lack of adventure.
And I just think it takes it takes so much courage to be creative. And I think the lack that we have is not a lack of creativity, it's a lack of courage. And that lack of courage is not always down to an internal system of just going, you're not courageous enough. I think more often than not, it's a community responsibility, where if your community is unsafe, your family's broken into a zillion pieces because of arguments and brokenness, and you've gone for a schooling system which has pulled you in multiple directions. You have to get a job in an economic crisis. It's not safe for you to be creative. It's safer for you to play it safe. And stay it simple. So suddenly this thing which is inherently human and absolutely necessary for the thriving of the human race is this activity which takes a huge amount of courage, because you just have to slightly sidestep the normal. And then, like I said, you can come under fire so quickly. And where the imagination being an enemy, not a friend thing comes in, is suddenly, as well as everyone else having a sniper pointed at you, your own imagination has a sniper pointed at you as well.
Well, I'm guessing you would have talked yourself out of doing the book as many times as you've talked yourself into it.
More, you know. I think that's, but in a way, that that's spurring me on even more. And I think that if that's when we can make the transition, is instead of asking ourselves, are you going to be creative today? I think there's two really good questions to ask. Is one, am I going to be courageous today? And two, if that question is really hard to answer yes to, is there anything I can do to make it easier to be courageous today? And suddenly then you've got a different, more practical kind of, you can do more things externally about that question, because it's a very abstract question to go, am I courageous enough to create something today? Is a real well, am I? Yes or no? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And that means something very different for everyone. But if you ask yourself the question, what can I do around me to help me take more risks? What are the relationships I have in my life? Does that person that I'm dating make me feel safe and empowered, or do they make me feel like I just need to keep earning money?
Yeah.
Or what food do I eat? Because if I'm feeling unhealthy every day, then it's making it harder for me to be courageous. So if we ask them questions, and they're every podcast in the world talks about these kind of basic things, maybe not with this language, but in order to be more creative, I think it's a question of creating
the environment for creativity.
So that would be my first port of call for anyone.
On a macro, on the macro sort of, or the high levels setting, you touched on something really interesting, which is there's a guy called Peter Thiel, who's a co-founder of PayPal, and he was asked, why is it that entrepreneurs tend to be such arseholes? Basically, you've got Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg. People, why are they weird? Kind of like these. Do you have to be a douchebag and a weirdo to succeed? And he flipped the question and said, what is it about our society where only the oddballs are the ones who are able to overcome everything that's the one, so why is it only they're the ones who can kind of do the act of courage? And on the at the micro level, I think you're absolutely right. You need to create the preconditions. My only challenge to that would be something that I heard recently, which is that something that our generation or your generation, I don't know how you want to skin it, but there's well, okay, let me put it, I wanted to wrap up on mental health, and I'll kind of tie this into my
let me just add something in, because I think I've forgotten an important third in them two questions. So the first one was about, am I courageous? The second is about creating the right conditions for me to be courageous enough to create. The third one answers perhaps where you were going, but maybe not. And it was negligent of me not to bring it up, is we also have a responsibility to create environments for other people who don't have the ability to create their own safety in order to be courageous. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that any human can give another, is can you create somewhere else for someone's creativity to thrive, where they feel empowered to be courageous? That has to be included in that, because I think that even in my I hope that in my act of writing my book, or in the act of me making a film, I'm responding to all three. I'm responding to an internal compass which says, am I going to be someone who's courageous? Am I someone that builds good conditions for my own courageousness to occur? And am I someone that builds good conditions for other people to do that? Because, people are not just subject to their own choices. Yeah.
And aren't you, by definition, by doing an act of courage, helping with number three, because they've got an example that they can see that courage works?
I think so. But again, maybe that doesn't quite get right down to the dirty of it, where it's like, if someone can't afford to eat, in your community. I tend to, even though I work on big global humanitarian projects, I tend to still try and think in our local communities, because I can do something about it tonight. You know,
Yeah.
I can't do anything about the Ukraine crisis tonight. I can't. I don't have the resources to beat Putin, or to end the war. I do have the resources to feed someone if I know that they haven't got food. I do have the resources to make a phone call to someone who is lonely.
Yeah.
And that's something I can do right about it. And it's not some kind of like high level, by my courageousness of writing a book,
Sure.
they're going to feel inspired. It's like right down in there going, I am
roll
here
your
with
sleeves
you.
up. Yeah.
And that has to be a part of the focus for me, at least, is that, you know, beauty, creativity can't be selfish, like in a way, like it. I think that we have a responsibility as humans to serve the people around us as well.
Well, I think that's probably I mean, it is actually a religious thing as well, where, you know, people are kind of forced to get away from the big macro high-minded stuff just to get in and around their community, because it's so easy to kind of be all, you know, generous and free-spirited with the world when you're not actually doing anything for people around you. I wanted to kind of pick your brains on mental health, and the reason why is that I'm 36 and you're 28. Are you? Now, I'm not that much older than you, but I confess, rightly or wrongly, for the first 25 years of my life, maybe 28 years of my life, I never heard the words mental health.
Yeah.
It just didn't exist as a term. You know, right through my schooling, university. I mean, it just seemed overnight at some point that this became such an important thing. And I heard something recently which kind of was very powerful, and I'm still trying to grapple with it in the context of this sort of mental health crisis that we are told we're in, or we are in, which is that the young generation has confused itself, and that it thinks that through good self-esteem or good mental health, let's say, you can get strong achievement. When in reality, it's through achievement and that you get good self-esteem. Does that make sense? Like, you need to do stuff to justify your confidence.
Yes.
Not be There's a lot of people go, well, once I got my confidence back, then I'll do these things.
Do stuff. Yeah.
So I just want what is mental health to you?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to you in terms of I mean, you've talked about it with anxiety, but I'd just love to get your thoughts as someone who's obviously given a lot of bandwidth onto this subject. So
it's really interesting. Firstly, I hesitate to pin it down onto one generation that's alive at the moment. I wonder whether they are what our generation, I think I include myself in this, are landed with is the end of post-modernity, in a way, where we've kind of said, after World War II, get rid of religion, get rid of faith, get rid of community, almost like these kind of these value systems that have been around for thousands of years, and now science is going to answer everything. That's an overly simplified articulation of it, but it was kind of like these other things don't give us the answers. These intangible kind of things like faith will never get us to where we're going. Science is going to do it because we can figure everything out. We've been living through that for the better part of 100 years. And I think, have arrived at a point where we're going, science is amazing and done lots of stuff, but it doesn't answer isolation or loneliness or purpose or why or I don't feel good about myself today. It doesn't have answers for that, because I think we've pushed our value system so extreme in a way where we've neglected some other fundamentals of humanity, like connection and, you know, a sense of beyond ourselves and mystery, and that, to me at least, seem obvious to what it's about being human.
There's one word which I never hear. So if you're a fan of, like, again, like I'm bringing up 19th century fiction again, but like, you know, I love historical fiction, as well as just general, you know, old school fiction. And if you, all the Hornblower fans out there who will notice that one of the words that Hornblower uses a lot is the word duty.
Right. Yeah.
I just never hear. I can't remember the last time I've ever heard it on the radio, in the news.
It's that calling to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
For other people's sake, you know, it's like the sense that we are not just ourselves, we belong to a pack, you know. Even in our language, the whole thing of my truth and my thinking, there's elements of good and helpfulness about that, but there's other things which is, it serves to just completely tear us away from each other, because you never have to come to compromised consensus, which is why marriage is such a beautiful picture in theory, is because it's like two becoming one. That's our communities are about, you know, when we're unified despite our differences, people flourish, and that flourishing doesn't mean, you know, everyone's right, but yet they still flourish. Yeah. Because there's a safety net of a whole, of a togetherness. So which is positive sum. It's greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in a sense, I think in our pursuit of science, which has done many a good thing, we've maybe just not fostered some of our kind of rich values, which say it's okay to not always be right. It's okay not to be the most popular person in the room. It's okay to not be the cleverest. But it's really important to be connected in spite of all of the things. Well, it's amazing. So, science is, I guess it's filled a vacuum, but not realized it's the humility of its root. The whole point of science is that it's about falsifying things and only approaching things which can be falsified. Yeah. And if you read people like Richard Feynman, for people who aren't aware of him, he's, you know, Nobel Prize winning physicist, one of the most, you know, well-regarded people in the scientific community from 100 years ago. You know, you read his work, he's like, he says the beauty of science is that it reminds me how little I know. Yeah, yeah. And that how much I'll never know, and how the point is you're dealing with stuff that is a very small subset of a whole reality, and science has filled that void of religion, and it has an inherent religiosity today, for sure, which has just not got that fundamental backbone and substance to it that the religions that have been around for a while do have. I think the other thing that it's done, I mean, I don't in any way put them against each other. I think the fascinating thing that our science and innovation has done is it's created a better world in many ways. You know, healthcare being a great example. People don't die as much. That's thankful to science. Computers, like the labor-intensive work of going down a mine, doesn't exist in the same way anymore in our country. Not around the world, sadly. But what we've done is are you familiar with Maslow's theory? Hierarchy of needs. Is that we've kind of raised the foundation for the minimum standard of living, whereby, you know, we're no longer all working on farms where you wake up with the sun, you go do the farm thing all day, you come home, you eat, you go to bed, rinse and repeat every day. We've got a really healthy world in some ways, where we've now just got this abundance of time to think about, who am I? And this is questions which maybe we've never had as a culture, we've never had as much time as we have now to address these kind of.
So the vacuum is ever more apparent.
It's oh my gosh, like, even with things like AI and ChatGPT being able to write essays, if you look at someone who's doing their A-levels, you don't even need to really concern yourself in the future with writing essays, because a computer can just write the essay for you. So suddenly your demand on your time is even less, because you don't even have to sit down and write the essay anymore.
Yeah.
And you've got even more time to ask you questions of what's important. So there's just a more apparent void of time to be filled. And that must be really scary, because for anyone that I think that has probably struggled with their mental health, one of the scariest things to do is sit in a room on your own in silence. If you kind of magnify that and say we've got a generation of people that are, metaphorically sitting in a room on their own in silence, having to address questions that so many generations before us just simply haven't had time to address, because they've just had to be at work.
Yeah.
And so it's a really weird kind of conundrum that we've kind of positioned ourselves in, where we've done a lot of good things, but like with all the good things that have ever happened through history, we've just arrived at the next kind of problem of, oh, well, if we can live until we're 100 safely, what do we do until we're 100?
Yeah.
If we're not working between 60 and 100 because we're retired, there's 40 years of gardening. How do I address that inside of myself, that I have so much time to look for something deeper? And I think that they just don't have the right tools. I don't think any of us really have the right tools to really explore that yet. I think this is brand new.
Yeah. But the diminishment of things like, duty and marriage and things like that, I can't help.
No.
So look, as you know, I like to kind of wrap these things up with a thing that I call the long bet, which is, I make it a 10-year time horizon. Why not 9? Why not 11? Who knows? But let's make it 10, because it's far out enough that it doesn't matter, but it's not so close that it's it's meaningless. What would you like to see happen with yourself or with the world over 10 years, or what do you think will happen? And if it's what would you like to see happen, obviously answers like world peace or people being kinder are discouraged.
Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
I would like to see more investment into how we better curate our thinking and our minds. I think that needs to be given some real attention on mass scale, not something for those that, not simply for divergent human beings that have the right conditions to flourish, but for all humans, that there is spaces and places where they can go to really explore their minds, but not necessarily under the guise of healthcare, just under the guise of this is just a good part of being a human. I don't exactly know what that looks like in practice, but if the book that I'm writing as a side kind of contributes to helping people think about how they think, then that would be great.
Yeah, kind of reimagining of rewriting, imagining. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when is the book? When can we expect to have this book out?
I mean, I have just had a baby in the last 4 weeks. So
congratulations.
I haven't written anything for 4 weeks, so slowed down a little bit, but the aim would be certainly in the first half of next year.
Great. And where can people find you in the meantime?
Best place to find everything that I'm doing is on Instagram, Matt James Cooper, and there's links to my website, my film work, my podcasts, the thoughts on my book. They're all there.
Great. Well, Matt, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And
it's been amazing.
I look forward to doing it again soon.
Yes, it's been good. Cheers, boss.
Cheers, buddy.